did start the meeting at 6 o'clock and we went into executive session. We'll now start our public session. So I ask you to please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God.
Wanted to start today's meeting by reviewing our mission and vision. And our mission is to create a culture of academic excellence through inclusive and innovative learning opportunities for the whole child, while our vision is to empower all learners to reach their full potential in a globally competitive world. With that, I need a motion to approve the agenda, which includes the removal of the Great Oaks presentation due to a scheduling conflict, as well as the addition of superintendent's agenda item number 3.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Weber?
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
Dr. Steger,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballant.
Aye, the agenda is approved. I need a motion for the approval of the minutes.
So moved. Second.
Any questions? We're just getting the motion for the approval of the minutes of last meeting. Yep. Any additional comments from the board? Any questions, additions we'd like to see to the minutes? Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Dr. Steger,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballant.
Aye, the minutes are approved. Mrs. Weber, if you could give us a overview of the protocol for today's meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Ballant. Welcome to all of you who are in our audience this evening, as well as those of you who are in our virtual audience. For those of you who are in our virtual audience, you can find a copy of tonight's agenda on the Board of Education page at sycamoreschools.org. That, along with the addendum, is available this evening. Those minutes that were just approved by the board will be posted tomorrow for those of you who wish to view the minutes of the March 1st Board of Education meeting. We do have several members who I believe are in our audience this evening who wish to address the board in public participation. So Mr. Ballant will call you up to the mic, which is located over here. He's going to do a quick review of the guidelines for public participation in our meetings so that you will be aware of those. We do ask those of you who might be in our virtual audience, if you wish to address the board, to please send those requests on non-agenda items to our moderator this evening, Mr. Christian Long, who is our Director of Technology. His email address is longc@sycamoreschools.org, and he will make sure that we are aware of those as well. I think that's it, Mr. Ballant, for this evening. So I think we're ready to start with our first agenda item.
Thank you, Mrs. Weber. We'll move on to public participation. I do have 6 people that have expressed an interest to speak tonight. I just remind everyone that I will call you up to the podium. Your comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person, or a total of 15 minutes per topic. And these would be topics that are not on the agenda. Occasionally, the board will respond immediately. However, on most occasions, the board will instruct the superintendent or treasurer to gather additional information and report back. Please understand that if a question or comment is not addressed during the meeting, it does not indicate a lack of interest on behalf of the board, but rather a desire for us to gather additional information and respond in the most helpful manner. I just want to remind you, we will not comment on personnel issues, nor will we allow student names or information which could be considered private by law to be included in public comments. If anybody out there has any concerns or questions, yet they don't want to speak at a meeting, I just remind you that you can always reach out to any board member. Our emails are on the district website. Reach out to us with any questions or concerns, and we'll be happy to talk to you, address any concerns, or direct you in the right point you in the right direction. So with that, the first public participation is Kylie, Stout. Thank you very much. So if you please come up and again, introduce yourself.
Mrs. Wagner, could you help us this evening with timing to make sure that we meet our 3-minute requirement. The other thing I would just ask you, Kylie, just to make sure, if you could just do a quick test for us so that we can make sure that our audio is working.
Hello, is that right? My name is Kylie Stutt, and I'm a current senior at Sycamore High School. I've been a student of this school district for as long as I can remember. My experience from preschool to my senior year has been with Sycamore. I'm here today to address the current issue of the numerous cases of bullying, sexual harassment, and violence that has suddenly become an issue to the board, even though that this has been happening for years. I want to implement into the school new reforms of how we can support our students who are victims of these different forms of violence, while equally punishing those inflicting pain onto others. It is frustrating to walk every day down the highways of the high school knowing I pass by multiple boys who have assaulted me and other women, and hardly anything has been done besides a small suspension. Currently, we are unable to leave our classrooms during aviator bell time, which is when many students can go to seek mental health support, whether it's through a counselor, therapist, or a mental health club, and you've stripped this opportunity out of our hands, especially from those who have done no harm. I remember Mr. Porter during his first speech he gave in the theater. He spoke about how he didn't want the entire school to be punished for a few students' actions. What has happened? We all know the fights. Why is it that the rest of the students are being punished for what other students have done? We all know these fights are happening. Many of us saw it in person or through videos recorded and passed around among the student body. The school board has a no bullying policy. On Sycamore's website for bullying, intimidation, and harassment prevention, it is written, Sycamore will do everything possible to address any complaints of harassment, intimidation, and bullying. We encourage students, staff, parents, and community members to report this type of behavior to the district if help is needed to solve a problem. We are currently providing a harassment, intimidation, and bullying prevention training for all students in order to educate them for a school-safe environment. What training has actually been put into place? A video with a few questions that says not to bully other students isn't helping anybody. It is unacceptable that this is all Sycamore has done to help support its students. Training isn't fixing the issue of why students are bullying other students. You are giving a weak attempt to treat the symptoms, but not the actual core issue. According to the National Bullying Prevention Center, 1 out of every 5 students report being bullied, which is whopping 20% of students that are having this happen. And these are only the students that are actually reporting these incidents. How can we fix the problem of sexual harassment and bullying that continues to be tolerated under a no toleration policy? I want to advocate for the funding for more mental health support that the school can offer for its students and supporting the victims of every encounter that has happened this year and the future forward. This would include adding an additional amount to the school's budget that would cover more therapists in the building, because currently there's hardly enough room for the student body. If you hear something, say something. There are so many telltale signs of problematic students, and we can support them and help them to make change. This will prevent them from attacking or harassing other students and other people in the future. If we are to continue coddling and supporting this behavior, then it will continue to happen. If we are able to support the mental health of others, then I wholeheartedly believe that this school will see many more changes among its students' body. I believe it is important that we help each other more often and learn what it means to respect each other. Thank you. I have one more sentence.
Yeah, you can go ahead and finish it.
If we don't have respect for each other, then we have nothing.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next public participant is Atlas Suarez.
You have to test the mic or, okay. My name is Atlas Suarez and I'm an early graduate at Sycamore High School. Instead of finishing high school in 4 years like the rest of my peers, I have taken my senior and junior year together and will be graduating in May of 2023. I have made this decision due to the numerous amounts of bullying I faced at Sycamore High School. I'll be driving into these issues now. I entered Sycamore High School in 2020. I was 13 and openly out as gay. A month into my year at Sycamore, I faced the first instance of bullying. I was added to a group chat with sophomore girls. They laughed at me for my body, my looks, but most importantly, my sexuality. They added a freshman girl who outed me the year prior. Outing is when you discuss the fact that someone is gay without the person's permission. I was ridiculed and mocked at the high school before, but words like lesbo and fag were spewed at me for the 2 months following. This took such a mental health toll that I outed for online learning for my freshman year. The sophomore year, I started exploring my gender identity and identified as transgender. I thought that this would stop at Sycamore. I was wrong. A group of individuals turned on me and made my Sycamore experience miserable. I was bullied for being transgender, and it progressed to more than just words. Students would take pictures of me in the halls or class, and I was followed into the restroom. I received so much hate online, and I got told to end my life. These events took place almost daily. I asked to use another restroom because I was followed, and I came to administration with screenshots, and they did nothing about it. How many warnings did you have to give for something to be done? My last straw was junior year at the high school. I was using the male restroom because I identified as a male. It took 3 days for someone to say something to me. 2 boys went to the restroom and made comments about it being a women's restroom. I got called slurs. I made my decision to graduate early 2 weeks into my junior year. I continued to use the restroom because they seemed less busy, or I would use male friends to come with me, but that wasn't always available. I went to use the restroom one day at lunch, and I was followed by a handful of boys. They shook my stall, threw things at my feet, and took their phone to record me. This time, not only did I go to administration, but 7 people reported the incidents of bullying, and nothing was done. I still see these boys acting the same way every day. Why should I fear for my safety and comfort at Sycamore? Events like these have traumatized me to the point where I had to speed up my education. In May of 2023, I will be walking out of Sycamore at 16. I'm graduating as a child. Just last week, I got told that if we see something, say something, but when we say something, nothing is done. I have said something for the last 3 years and still face the bullying and harassment. I shouldn't have to worry for my safety in a place that preaches inclusivity and zero tolerance. You guys preach about the zero tolerance policy at Sycamore, but then when it's reported, nothing gets done.
Next, we would ask Kathy Sadler to come forward.
My name is Kathy Sadler. I live at 9035 East Kemper Road. I currently have a 6th and an 8th grader, and we started in the district when my oldest was in 2nd grade. And I'm addressing the personal learning days. So there are state recognized personal learning days, which count towards the required in-class days in which our district must meet according to Ohio and federal laws to get budget and funding. Specifically, Sycamore's personal learning days are not recognized by the state and therefore do not count towards our in-class day requirements. Even without these days, our district would meet and exceed the minimum required days. Regarding the teachers on personal learning days, they are usually personal development or records day. The teachers already have 8 hours or more of assigned work, which does not include creating or grading additional homework. You're increasing the burden upon teachers who already have far too much on their plate, and you're asking them for more with no actual added benefit. Having kids sitting at home doing extra repetitions of work that they're already doing is not particularly valuable to curriculum. They're not learning new skills. It's not enriching. It's not quality education. And the teachers aren't supervising them. So now there's an additional burden being put on the families, some of which do not have the resources like the internet or time and capacity to help these kids once they're home. It would be okay if the teachers are not assigning additional work for every Monday through Friday day during the week. In my opinion, it would be better to allow the kids to pursue their own interests rather than forced and unnecessary busy work. I'm requesting that our district cease assigning excessive busy work on the days that kids should be enjoying a much needed break. Please understand and recognize quality is greater than quantity.
Next, we have Cheryl Paith.
Hi, good evening. My name is Cheryl Paith. I was here last month, so I'm sorry if I'm going over the same items again that you may not want to really discuss again. But accessibility is still a challenge for many people who use wheeled devices, but not just wheeled devices. We're also talking about individuals that some of our athletes, like maybe someone got hurt, they may use crutches, maybe you have a staff member that had to have a knee replaced. Accessibility is very important. And I've recently been told that the front office, which has been temporarily housed downstairs by the athletic ramp, will be moving over spring break upstairs to the second floor. So once when I thought we were starting to make some strides and some headway, because I was told we're going to put a curb cut so wheelchairs can access the sidewalk over spring break, I thought, oh, we're finally getting somewhere. We're going to be able to access the sidewalk from the parking lot like you should be, like the law states you should be able to do. I've been told that they're moving to the second floor, and the only way to check into the front office at the high school midday once school starts is going up the stairs. That's not going to work for everybody. And I'm also told that the ramp to that office on the second floor isn't going to be completed until spring 2024, and that it's tied to the swimming pool resurface project. So I guess I don't understand why an entranceway is tied to a swimming pool. If we're opening the front office and we have stairs, why don't we have the ramp too? I can't imagine that Hamilton County would approve this type of schedule for accessibility for ADA for the main entrance. And I'd like to see the ramp construction move forward so people can access the front office midday. And I'd like to know, what is the accessibility plan once the office moves while we're waiting for this ramp to be finished? Thank you.
Next, we have Jamie Mack.
Hi, I'm Jamie Mack. I am also a Sycamore parent. My daughter has been in the school district since kindergarten. I'm also addressing some of the ADA issues that we've been experiencing. A lot of frustration is coming around the fact that we are relying solely on the architects to come up and tell us what ADA compliance is necessary. Participating in the board meeting for Sims Elementary School, I personally saw some color paint swatches that were displayed that were not compatible with people who had a specific type of color blindness. And I was told that the architects are meeting with the ADA compliance. I think that we're looking at the bare minimum, and I'm frustrated with the fact that there is not a committee being developed with the amount of money that we are spending from public dollars to identify areas where we could be inclusive, not meeting minimum ADA compliance. For example, we spend a significant amount of money on our brand new football stadium, but if you're a student who has special needs and you need to sit in the handicap section, you cannot sit with your peers. That is not inclusive. If you're a student who needs assistance going to the bathroom, you have to go into a women's bathroom as a boy with your mother, or you have to go into a men's restroom as a girl with your father to get assistance because there is no family bathroom at the stadium. That's unacceptable. There's also not a good ramp to get you into that area around the Gregory Center because it has been moved. In addition to that, I'm concerned with the fact that we're in a rush to move to the new office in the high school. We're not just talking about the few students that come in and use the ramp. We're talking about any visitors. So I believe it's Wednesday, you can come to the hangar and shop. I know that there are adults, visitors who want to come into the building who would have to go up several flights of stairs to get into the main office to sign in, then go down the stairs to get to the cafeteria to shop. And then if they follow proper rules, they must go back up the flights of stairs to get to the office to sign out, and then go down those stairs again to leave. I'm very concerned with what I'm seeing. We're not just talking about a handful of students. We're talking about the fact that these students are a part of our supposedly inclusive environment within Sycamore. And it's frustrating to see the fact that we have to advocate for something that should be required. Like Cheryl, I'm surprised to see that these plans were approved in such a manner. I guarantee that when you went to the county to get approval, you did not tell them there would be a 14-month lag between the time that your steps were built and the time that your ramp was built. The reality is the ramp should have been built first because everyone could use the ramp. I would just like to see some better steps put in place for the accessibility of both our students and our families in the community. It's not just the students that utilize this building. Thank you.
And then I also have Marcelin Shaki. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong.
I'm Marceline Chalky. I live in Blue Ash. I don't have a written report. What I'm looking for is the logic on changing the hours that the elementary school is going to be in session next year. Anybody got a comment about this?
Mrs. Wagner, if you want to, if there's a couple minutes, you can sum this up. This was presented at a board meeting, at our last board meeting. There was a discussion on it, along with the rationale for it. So it is available on our recording for you to go back to our district website and review that.
Did anybody go on the internet and look up the research that says elementary students should be going to school earlier and the high school should be going later, not putting them in school more time?
So are you specifically asking about a change of start time for all of our students or the additional 15
I want to know
minutes?
why the elementaries are being changed.
So the elementaries are being changed as part of a larger conversation K through 12. We had a number of our buildings that lost instructional time due to the pandemic, specifically high school, junior high and green. And so we're restoring those times. But then also we've got significant legislation from the dyslexia law in terms of the reading requirements. And so adding 15 minutes onto the student day, K through 4, when we met with the K through 4 building principals and had conversation about how to best meet those requirements, they really felt that that 15 minutes would serve our students and the requirements to make sure that we're really getting to the meat of the dyslexia legislation.
You haven't been in a kindergarten classroom in the afternoon, have you?
I have.
That's why they ask for the specials to be in the afternoons, because the maximum learning for 5-year-olds is in the morning, not in the afternoon. And I don't believe that this is going to benefit our students at all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's the last. There are no additional public participations. Thank you very much. Moving on to the superintendent's agenda, Mr. Lovell and Mrs. Weber, master facility plan update.
Good evening, board. Thank you for your time this evening. I have a few things I want to discuss with you. Mrs. Weber and I can tag team in Mr. Lewis. I'll actually have you jump in on this first slide here. We had an update on the Seeger Family Natatorium, kind of what it went on a little bit the other day, but I did want to put some slides up here and just kind of show you, these are the two kind of master facility plan projects I'm highlighting today. And then we'll get into talk about the baseball, softball complex and kind of how that's moving forward. The transportation facility, you know, this has been a long journey for our district. And I am proud to say that the land was secured and the building is going up and we remain on time and on budget. In fact, I hope to say that we can be ahead of schedule with this as well. I was over there the other day. They're currently putting in our lifts for our buses, which is a pretty big process. But they're also building out the walls and getting the site kind of secured. The other thing I do want to tell you as well is that beginning this June, one of the things we're going to see is the city of Blue Ash, or I'm sorry, yes, the city of Blue Ash. We work with a lot of municipalities, I apologize. We'll be building an access road from Grooms and eventually it'll connect all the way to Reed-Hartman, which will give our transportation team much better access once that facility opens. So great things happening out there. We appreciate our partners at Graybach. We keep moving forward with that. The Seeger Family Natatorium, Mr. Lewis, you want to talk a little bit about the other day?
I appreciate you giving me a couple of minutes just to talk about the Seeger Family Natatorium. Obviously, yesterday was a dynamic situation, and I'm just very thankful for our first responder partners from the city of Blue Ash, city of Montgomery, Sycamore Township, Sims Township, and Sims Township is Sims Madeira, Sims Loveland Fire Department. I don't know where I got Madeira, but Sharonville also responded. And, you know, without their support and quick response, you know, it makes me ill to think about what could have gone wrong with the situation at the high school. So just want to say thank you to them and containing it to the demolition that is going on in that natatorium facility, and appreciate the staff, the students that were still in the building that reacted appropriately and got out of the building. And certainly a big thank you to the parents that were able to come and get students and get them off property. So the reason that we did not have school today and also tomorrow is just, there were a few things that need to be taken care of after an incident like that, just to clean up the smoke that's in the building. But there is no major damage to the newly renovated areas or the new portions of the building. The only damage, thankfully, was to the part we're already demolishing. So again, thankful to all of our partners that kept us safe, made that incident go away very quickly. And now we're just in recovery mode and making sure that things move forward. And so we will probably continue demolition on Monday. There'll be additional safety protocols in place to ensure that this doesn't happen in the future. So
Mr. Lewis,
Yeah.
it is fully anticipated, though, that the high school will open as planned following spring break.
yes, we will open as planned. And it would have been a stretch to open tomorrow, but we're very confident that by Monday, and I think we're going to be able to I know one of the concerns for parents is when can students get in and get materials? And we do believe we'll be able to open up some time, likely tomorrow, I believe, to
Correct.
Get people in and get materials and so they can enjoy their break.
Mr. Lewis, or it could be either or
Sure.
for the question. Were the classrooms that we discussed at our last evening board meeting impacted, the ones with the special education classrooms? Did they get any water damage during that time?
No, ma'am. The most all of the water that was used by our fire departments to extinguish the fire was isolated directly over the pool area. Any water that was a result from that was minimized to that hallway, the main new entrance hallway there. But it didn't create any damage that we see. We're going to continue to go through processes, though, to ensure that just because we didn't see it doesn't mean it's not there in that area, to make sure that we're following up. But none of our academic areas or even our new administrative office areas was impacted by this.
And then one other just follow-up question.
Sure.
When it comes, Mr. Lewis, thank you very much for stating the additional safety procedures that will be put in place in the future. I appreciate that. And that just on that same subject, when it comes to demolition, that I assume that that's what you mean by that will take place at a later time in the day. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the main demolition of the pool area, it has been planned to be done the last few days of this week, but really capitalizing on spring break, mainly due to the fact that the noise and the disruption, plus we had to bring in a lot of dumpsters and we didn't want to take up student parking spaces. So the majority of the demolition is going to be complete by the time the students come back to school after spring break. Then the work's going to start on securing pylons and things like that, so support structures around. So, but to the point, hopefully the mitigation will all kind of happen through the next week and be done before students come back on campus.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for that. And I just want to second too, our first responders are phenomenal. We are so lucky to live so close to so many amazing different municipalities that support us. They showed up in full force, and this was minimized to a 15-minute event. And we were able to do a lot of things proactively in that short amount of time that really helped us minimize any bigger impact within the building. So we really appreciate those partnerships. All right, so let's talk about the baseball and softball. I'm sure that you all have seen some buzz on social media around kind of the plans moving forward. What I want to do is I want to walk you through somewhat of the journey we've taken to get to the point where you see this rendering up here. So as part of the Always an Aviator campaign, there has been momentum around upgrading our baseball and softball facilities. If anybody specifically has been on our baseball field, you have experienced the rolling hills of the outfield. But outside of that, there's other just upgrades that need to be done in that area. We have had over the course of the last few years, momentum with some groups that have fundraised for some of these upgrades, and we have money associated with those things. However, one of the things that our team, our Always an Aviator team, wanted to do is really take a look at the facility holistically and say, if we could dream big and we could say we want to come together and we really want to create these world-class facilities for our athletes to play, what might that be? So basically what happened from that point is a lot of stakeholder feedback started to happen. That's meeting with coaches, boosters, folks that are connected to our Always an Aviator campaign, and other parents that are passionate about those those projects. A lot of conversation was had around what do you desire from your team specific, sport specific approach? What are some of the functional needs that we have? And then what are those kind of big dreams you might have for those facilities as well? Through those conversations, we took the first step in engaging an architectural firm, MSA Architects. They specialize in sports facilities in the region and across the country. And so what we wanted them to do is we wanted them to start to engage in the stakeholder feedback loop, to hear what folks are saying, to get us to the point where we have an estimate and a rendering of what might this cost. What you see here is a result of those conversations and us working with MSA. The price tag that you see all the way to the right there represents the total price tag for both softball and baseball. What we have done, though, is we've really wanted to take a step back, and maybe lessons learned from some of our other projects that we've done is really say, okay, if this is our dream, what's the multi-phase approach to get to this point? And so what we did was we broke this down into 3 phases based on each sport. So actually what we can do is we can fundraise specifically for each of the projects and how they're broken down. And I don't have that slide up here for you today, but that 5.1 million, I just wanted to recognize is the full amount of the entire project at completion in today's dollars. So I'm sorry,
just baseball and softball, or that includes the tennis courts that are pictured?
That's just baseball, softball. Correct. Yes. Thank you for that. So when we engaged MSA in the preliminary contract, it was really to help us vision and get an estimated number associated with this complex. From that point, what we realized we need to do is we needed to move forward with the RFQ process. What we wanted to do is we wanted to see through that process what design firms might be interested in taking us to the point where we can get our drawings, our full-scale drawings, to truly understand the scope of the work. While we feel really confident with the $5.1 million because how we've associate our soft costs with it and things like that. We don't know the true number until we actually get those 50% drawings. And we've talked a lot of that with some of our other athletic venues, the pool and things like that. So we went through the RFQ process. We went through and we rated the companies that submitted a request. And we went through that and we decided that MSA would be the better option to move forward in regards to moving this project fully to the design phase. And so that agreement, I believe, is in front of you tonight with MSA. All we want to do with MSA at this point is get to the point where they are moving forward with the drawings. And once we have those drawings, then we'll be able to take those next steps. Excuse me. Just clarify.
Let me just clarify that we're not asking you to approve an agreement this evening. What we're asking you to do is to give us authorization to move forward with negotiating both an agreement and a contract price with MSA. That would be something that once we have come to that end of those negotiations and can talk with you about potential funding for that, we would bring that forward. Right now, there's no cost or no expenditure of funds associated with approval of this resolution. So just want to make sure that that's really clear, but it does keep the process going so that as the group that's working with Always an Aviator on these 2 projects have what they need to be able to continue to move forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Weber. I jumped ahead to the next conversation. My apologies. Yes, this is just
Mrs. Weber, is there a commitment to use them, or is this just no cost, no commitment?
The process, and Mr. Lewis, you can help me with this too, because you've been through it before, but basically what we did as we went through the process is we ranked the architectural firms or design firms that submitted proposals in response to the RFQ. When we ranked them for the baseball and softball facilities, MSA came out as the preferred design professional. We will work with them to negotiate a contract. If we cannot come to a successful conclusion, then we would go to potentially the second qualified candidate. So it's not a complete done deal, but what this does is gives us the authorization to continue moving forward with that process with MSA.
Thank you.
Just a general question,
Sure.
Mr. Lovell, the 5.1 million,
Mhm.
what amount have we currently fundraised through the Always an Aviator campaign specifically for the baseball and softball? Like what percentage of the 5.1 have we already secured?
Sure. I'll let Mrs. Weber answer that. I know she's more into the details of the fundraising.
Just in response to your question, Mr. Comerford, of the two projects right now, they have fundraised really on separate paths. Baseball with a big head start. If you recall, the board provided authority to name Dan Henke Field as part of the baseball complex. And then also, so they've raised over $300,000 to start on the work on the baseball field. The softball field or complex is a little bit newer to that game. They've raised minimal dollars at this point, but I think having this information will help them be able to move forward with some of their fundraising and corporate sponsorship.
So safely to say we're less than 10%.
Yes, that's correct.
The why behind this work is that, I guess, lessons learned from the stadium project and other projects that we've done is that we needed strong visuals to get out there to help kick the Always an Aviator campaign into gear. It's really hard to engage donors, fundraisers, sponsors, things like that, without that visual of what we want to run after. And so that's why we're at the process we are now to kind of try to move this forward a bit more. And I will tell you, the stakeholders, the Always an Aviator team, they're excited about this. They see this attainable through fundraising, and they're ready to kick things into gear. Any other questions about baseball, softball? Okay, so the next slide here. Right here, you'll see a rendering of our field house / locker rooms at the multi-use stadium. This has been, from the very beginning, this has been a phased approach. We knew that we wouldn't be able to do this in what we quote unquote said would be a phase 1, which was the original site development package, stadium, bleachers, field, and everything. There is a strong desire to have these locker rooms out at that field. There's a few reasons for that. And number one, for the players to be somewhere prior to the game and during halftime, and locker facilities out there, since none exist at the moment. Part of this project, though, also would add the accessibility for the restrooms that we were talking about a little bit earlier as part of this, and also long-term storage out there on that site for our grounds crews to maintain. Right now, that's on the other side of the campus. This project is a multi-phase project in and of itself. So phase 1 would be building the building, but it'd be a shell. So we would have plumbing rough-ins for the locker components, the locker room components of it. And it would have basically just a roof, the walls, and heat. In addition to that, phase 2, we would do the build out of the interior. And then phase 3, we would move forward with the visitor locker room. I use the word locker room and field house interchangeably. They're the same thing. It just depends on who you ask and what we want to call it. We probably need to solidify on the name of what it is. But it's basically a place for our athletes to be out there. If you remember last year, what we did was we rented tents for our home and visitors to be in during the games. And we had portable restrooms that we put out there as well. Again, we spent significant dollars on those for the games. So we're trying to minimize that and trying to figure out a path forward. What we are ready to do is we have the renderings and we have the new revised layout and floor plan. We've reduced the scope of the building from what it was originally supposed to be, from about 9,000 square feet down to 7,000 square feet. That was not done in a unilateral decision by my department or my team. That was done based on coaches' feedback about what they minimally needed in that space. The projected cost of phase one is $600,000, and that includes the soft cost and design fees and associated with the project itself. So that's all in to get that done. What we're bringing forward tonight is actually an agreement to move forward for those drawings, the 50% drawings. The timeline that we're up against, just so you are aware, the timeline that we're up against is we need to have shovels in the ground by May 1st. We have had a significant amount of conversations with Mr. Harden and his team, and they feel confident that they can get this money raised in order to get this done by August. But for us, the first step outside of that fundraising, the first step is to get the drawing started so that to get that May 1st deadline, we're able to get the permitting fees and the permitting done and all of those things in line. And so I believe the request tonight is for $41,000. And Mrs. Weber, you can explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lovell. Just a review of the funds that were available for the overall phase one of the project. We had between bond issue funds and fundraising through the Always an Aviator Fund, we had just about $6 million available for this project. Of that budget right now, after that completion of phase one and returns of contingency from the HDC, our construction management firm, there's approximately $113,000 remaining from that project. We would recommend that we utilize 41,000 of that, the cost for SHP's contract to fund as the seed money for funding this contract with SHP.
Mrs. Weber, I had a little bit of difficulty hearing you. Can you tell me again how much money you're taking it out of what contingency?
This, thank you, Mrs. Weiss, just for making me aware that it wasn't easily heard. If you recall, the total budget for the overall phase one of the stadium was $5,985,000. That included bond issue funds, our initial fundraising, and then finally $85,000 that was provided by the Sycamore Athletic Boosters to put in the ticket booth. So all in for that phase one, including the ticket booth, $5,985,000. Of that, once within the construction management contracts, they had contingency that were included in those contracts. They returned just about $150,000 back to the district from their initial contracts. Of that, we have $113,000 that would be available from those contingency funds to provide the dollars needed to do this next phase of the contract.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And Mr. Lovell, can you expand a little bit on Mr. Harden's belief that he can raise the funds?
Sure. It's hard to expand on somebody else's beliefs. What I would say is that,
Well, I mean, I'm just saying that, we all hope that, and of course,
sure.
but what proof do we have that we could actually raise roughly $500,000 more for phase one?
Yeah, what I would say to that is in these conversations, Mrs. Weber and I have made it extremely clear that we have a tight 30-day time frame. There's 30 days from approval, if we get approval, to shovel in the ground to be able to raise these funds to get this project going. He and his team believe through a strategic approach of doing specific calls, believe they can get those commitments to raise that amount of money. And so, Mrs. Weber, if you want to speak more to details, if you've had those with Mr. Harden, I have been kind of laser focused on the timeline, working with the architectural firm to get the designs and all that kind of stuff to get that number nailed down.
Mrs. Weber, I'll chime in just because I've had these conversations with Mr. Harden. I think the biggest hurdle that we were facing was just knowing, as Mr. Lovell laid out, like what are the costs and what are the phases and what's associated with it? Because people don't want to give money or fundraise to a project that they don't know what the outcome is, like, or what's the goal. So getting to that point of having a goal, you could actually have a real conversation, because it's hard. I've been in some of those conversations where you walk in and say, hey, we've got these great ideas. We don't know how much they're going to cost, but give us your money. It doesn't work. People want to know, what is the goal? How can we help you get there? And what does that look like? And what do we get for the total funds raised? So I would say his intentional strategy is, besides himself, some of the coaches are going to be engaging, past players, alumni, people that are really strongly affiliated with the athletic department. And we have what I would consider a pretty good communication list of potential donors that are interested in, I think, some of these projects. So it's certainly not just cold calling people around the districts. They're pretty targeted people that have been either expressing interest in projects, but wanting to know, like, what is the cost and how can we help you do it? So I think that's where we'll start. And what you hope is it kind of branches off of those individuals that, like, when you're talking with them, like, yeah, I'm going to give this, and hey, I think these 5 people would like to give as well. And so I think that once that gets started, that's usually how I would say that these things get funded. But I love your optimism. I love Mr. Harden's optimism, but
Okay, so let me ask the
we'll go see
question.
it.
If we do not raise, you said 30 days to raise that money?
Correct.
All right, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, Mr. Lovell. If we don't raise that money, what happens to the project?
It gets delayed until we raise the funds. That's been my conversation with the team from the very beginning, is that we can go to the board for the design fees to get the 50% drawings to get us to a place where we are solidified in that amount and we have the plans ready to go. But we've got to raise the money in 30 days to get a shovel in the ground May 1st. And if not, then we're going to go back to what we've done in the past, which is our tents and things like that out there. And so, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes,
Mr. Lovell, during what games are we having tents out there? Is it just during the football
it
games?
would just during the football games.
So are you saying that this is just going to be a locker room just for the football team then?
No, it's not. It'll be a mall. The way they're set up originally, without building them out, they're just going to be big rooms that anybody can go in and anybody can use. You could go in there and train in them. You could do whatever. Once they're built out, there'll be specific locker rooms. I need to figure out the right language to use for these spaces. When we talk about a field house, really the Gregory Center is a field house model, right? That's more of that. It's a locker room. And so they'll be able to use by multi-sports, multi-people out there.
So will it have 2 separate facilities? Say you had a women's team and a men's team playing at the same time. Will they eventually be 2 separate facilities? Or are you just talking like it's just going to be one locker room that whoever, luck of the draw, your team brings in more money on admissions, you're going to get the locker room?
Yeah. So the grand plan is that you have one building that would be for the home team and one building that would be for the away team. No matter what sport you have out there, it'd be home and away. Because we don't have obviously the funds to complete the entire project at one time, this building will have a wall down the middle and there'll be separate entrances. So it could be separated by male, female, home team, visitor team, whatever that is. We're trying our best to keep it as generic, to keep the cost down, to keep it as a shell, to then raise the money for the second phase, but be able to use it for multiple things.
I think back to your original question, there'll be multiple teams that use that
Correct.
facility when it's not in season. And Mr. Harden and team do it. And it's tough right now because we're not fully finished with construction, but they work hard to make sure that every team has a locker room space. If you recall, the first spaces that we finished as part of this project was in the Gregory Center for soccer, lacrosse, those teams, track teams, things of that nature. So they work extremely hard to try to identify space so that every team has a locker room space that's close to their facility. So it will be a multi-use stadium and a multi-use facility for multiple teams once we're finished with construction. So just have to bear with us a little longer.
And it's probably just a good reminder as well that when we did the site development plan out there, we actually did all the site work for the field house, and we ran utilities up close to the building itself to help us move this process along quicker, which is the reason we can actually get that time frame from May 1st to mid-August done.
And so if we approve this and then in 30 days, they don't raise the money, those plans just sit there until they raise the money and then it's used at that time.
Correct.
Any additional questions from the board? I need a motion for the selection of MSA Design as architect for the athletic facility improvement project and authorizing negotiation of an agreement for services. Yep.
Ma'am, could I ask you to go up to the microphone? Because thank you. No, if you don't do that, then it won't be captured on the video. So that would be helpful. Thank you.
My question was to you who have already created these drawings. I'm glad to hear that you talk about that it's not just the sports teams that will use this facility, such as like the marching band who has a lot of equipment. Is there any considered storage for that in your plans that you've downsized? I don't know if it was originally part of your 9,000. I'm certainly sure it's not part of your 7,000, but yet they're also a facility group that uses this facility. It isn't sports.
You're fine. That's actually a really good question. When we downsized the square footage on this building, the things that we actually downsized within that was a lot of the training room space, things like that was just bigger than we needed. We have a team room on one side, there's restrooms and locker on the other side, and a few offices in the middle. On the far end of it, we do have a preliminary design for storage that would be both for grounds and equipment out there. And we talked to multiple stakeholders, coaches to understand what the needs would be. But outside of that as well, we recognize we need more storage out there, and that can happen under our operations budget as well to look at what are some other storage options. So we've talked to the coaches, we've talked to the directors, we've tried to understand what the needs are out there to try to secure as much as we can. I don't know the total square footage off the top of my hand of what we're putting storage there, but there will be some in that building still. So what I do is I work with our athletic department. I work with Mr. Harden, and then he goes out and he gets stakeholder feedback for me. And we bring stakeholders in. I haven't had a direct conversation with the band leaders, but I do know the needs, or at least I assume I know the needs from what I've been told about equipment storage and things like that. Right now, there's band storage over behind the Gregory Center and a garage over there, which is far. Our ultimate goal is to get a lot of that storage over to that site as close as we can get it. So it's just, we're slowly moving towards that direction, but we're not losing any space that we have. I understand, but we're not moving all the equipment out there as well. We still have grounds building that we'll leverage. We just have to have some equipment out on that side of the property. Okay.
Any additional public comment on the field house? If it's on the field house, yes. Yep. Mrs. Patterson has a question. Oh, okay. So any additional question? Okay, thank you very much. So I need a motion from the board for the selection of MSA Design as architect for athletic facility improvement projects and authorizing negotiation of agreement for services.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Weber?
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Dr. Steger,
Aye.
Mr. Ballant,
Aye.
and Mrs. Bitter.
Aye.
Motion passes. I need a motion for the approval of SHP agreement, Sycamore High School Stadium Fieldhouse Phase 1.
So moved.
Second.
Any additional questions from the board?
I guess, having heard the public comment, I do
Yes.
want to know, is it being addressed that that more, if the band
Mhm.
needed a space for its equipment, that it could fit in there, or that additional space could be considered? I mean, what is the resolution on that, or what is the
Sure.
answer? I guess. I
Yeah,
didn't
so
pick up on
what
that.
I do after every board meeting, any feedback that I get, I'll take back. And when we start to look at those spaces, because the great thing about this is we just have the conceptual drawings and we have the estimated cost. What we do now, getting the 50% drawings, is we actually build that space out a little more. So I can go back. I'll actually go speak with the band directors to understand their needs, to make sure that we've captured that from what I've heard previously of the needs that they have out there. I just think it's important to understand that what we're building in phase 1 is a shell. There's no specific storage. There's nothing. The only thing that's included in phase 1 will be the accessible bathroom that we've talked about. Everything else, there won't be any plumbing in there or anything like that until we get to phase 2.
Thank you. I just
Yes.
think that it is a good point, because clearly our band and our musicians
Yep.
are using that space almost just as much in some ways as the athletics.
Absolutely.
Athletics.
Absolutely. And it is a multi-use stadium, and I keep that in mind through any conversations that we have. Yep. Thank you.
Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Mr. Ballant,
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
Dr. Steger.
Aye.
Motion passes. I need a motion for the change order Sycamore High School renovation project, GMP number 2.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the board? Mrs. Weber? Oh, go ahead.
I just always like to see the numbers in brackets.
Those are always fun, aren't they? We don't see those often.
Excuse me, what is your question on? What about it? If it is about this specific? Okay. Okay,
Here on your change of orders for your Sycamore High School renovation project, I just needed a little clarification so I understood what you were changing. It says here, the main entry, north turnaround asphalt, work removed from this project per change order number 76 will be added to the Natorium project. Can you tell me what is inside this main entry work that you're changing? Like what specifically is being moved and added to the Natorium? I was curious.
Mr. Lovell, do you have any more detail?
Yeah, so the change order deduct that we see on there is representative of the money that we didn't spend putting the north turnaround loop in. We get that credit back. That money goes to the natatorium project because it's actually going to be completed with the natatorium project. So as we've said, at the end of that natatorium construction, that's when that north loop will be complete. So all we're doing is giving the credit from what we didn't spend on the last GMP and moving that to the new GMP for the natatorium.
So we're just moving the funds to the natatorium.
Correct.
Is that? Yeah, that's what I was.
Correct. Because we're building a pool where the ramp would go.
Yeah, this is not public discussion. You had the opportunity for that. Okay, you can ask the question.
Well, I do actually have, aside from that, I do actually have a follow-up. So obviously the ramp, there was a ramp that people could get into in and out of the building which is near that area.
Correct.
And that's where the new parking circle will be in the pool, right? Or in the natatorium.
So when
because one ramp is now there is a ramp because my own child used that ramp quite a bit.
So
So it
let
had
me-
a cover on it and it was great. It was wonderful.
Yep.
And it's gone. So
Correct.
is is, yeah, so why are we giving money back and getting money back, but also not getting
Okay,
a ramp?
so, yeah, so let me take a step back. So if we remember to the original design plan of the high school, all we were doing was renovating the pool. It did not change any of the physical structure of the pool. So when we had the original design, the south loop that we have currently would be mimicked in the north loop, which would be our accessibility. The ramp would be maintained and how it currently is, it would just be upgraded. When we decided to move forward with the natatorium project, the natatorium gets bumped out. I don't even know how many feet, let's just say 20 feet, because that's where the stands will be coming down. So that entire ramp had to be dug out, the accessibility ramp and everything like that, because the wall's going to come closer to the north loop. So the ramp will look different now. So what we did, because we had to delay that scope of the project because of the natatorium construction, we get the change order deduct because we did not do that work. So we had prepaid for the pavement work and all that stuff. We're getting that credit back and we're putting that into the natatorium project because now that north loop and the accessibility will be completed when that wall is built further out on the natatorium.
Mr. Lovell, I think the confusion is.
Okay,
It's not that we're not going to do this work.
correct.
This work will be done.
Correct.
When the pool is done.
Yes,
So the scope of all the ramp will be
Correct.
completed. It's just that it will be done after the natatorium is finished.
correct. This number represents how we do our financing. That project had to close out. We had to move the money over and now we have the new project.
It's just a debit and a credit from one part of the
100%.
project to the other, but the scope itself is in
Maintains.
place.
Correct. Yes.
Yes, we did that because the contract GMP 2 that originally had that work in it will be closed out. It will be complete. All the other work will be complete prior to the completion of the natatorium. So we just wanted to make sure we would have the ability to close out the contract for the initial contract that went with part number, the maximum price addendum for the initial internal work at the high school, and that it could be included with the natatorium so that it could all be under one scope. We had a few other things that we did the same thing with in terms of some of the general requirements with that contract. So what you'll see in probably one of the next agendas will be a change order to add a similar cost to the natatorium GMP so that you can see that that work's still going to be done. We just made sure that we outlined, because whenever the board sees a deduction, you think that that may be a savings. We want to make sure that you are completely clear that this is not something that we're capturing in savings from that deduct change order. It's going to be something that's going to be just added to another contract.
Any additional questions from the board? Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Ballant,
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
and Dr. Steger.
No.
Motion passes. I need a motion for the approval of the bus purchase, bid approval for bus purchase.
So moved.
Second.
So we're just coming back to you for the purchase of the buses based on the bids. You'll notice that there are three buses there. That's a little bit different than what we've traditionally come to you with. Our standard replacement cycle is 4 buses a year. The cost of buses have significantly gone up, almost $25,000 per bus. And so we are bringing 3 forward this year to meet the allocation by the board for our $400,000 that in our budget that we allocate. I did talk with Mr. Miller significantly about this to understand the impact. We're going to make some adjustments to our replacement cycle. We believe we can mitigate some of this down the line as we transition to our new transportation facility and some of the new equipment we have and things like that. So we feel confident and comfortable with the request that we have in front of you.
And just to add, of the 3 buses, one is a lift bus. So we did add that additional feature to that bus to support the transportation needs of our students.
Yep.
Any additional questions from the board? Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
Dr. Steger,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballant.
Aye, motion passes. I need a motion for the approval of the Alumni Development Coordinator job description.
Pause on that one, Mr. Ballant, not approval. We're not voting on it.
Okay.
Just a discussion because,
Oh, sorry, I didn't read further down.
sorry about
Thank you.
that. No, I just wanted to stop you before we started taking action. So, realistically, this is just a continuance of a conversation. I wanted to get a job description in front of you. Very clearly, job descriptions are generic for a reason. They're just to describe the general duties of the position. And I think you got an extensive discussion of this last March when we were at Sims Elementary. And this is so that we can continue to move forward with that discussion. But I certainly wanted to put it in front of you before I would ask you to vote on it to see if you had any feedback. Dr. Davis and I sat down and we basically looked at a number of these positions that are out and around the area. And we kind of took the components that we thought were important for our district and put it in. And again, we left it high level and generic because it's not, a job description is not going to encompass everything that a position is going to do. But I will tell you the highlights of this is really stuff we've been talking about for a number of years, especially the coordination of our alumni network that is not necessarily very strong at this point. I think we have a lot of volunteers that try to do a great job with it, but it's not anyone's task to complete. So, this person would not only come in and take kind of control of Always an Aviator and be in charge of that. I think we would like to make that a longstanding, many public school districts have like a fund that they go to for other things when they're not fundraising for facility upgrades and things of that nature, that it's like a foundation to support other things that they want to do as a school district that don't fit within the school budget. So this is the early start of that process. Just wanted to put it in front of you, check and see if you have any questions, comments, concerns before we move forward and bring it back to you at the next meeting for continual consideration. And just a reminder to our community, and thank you to Mr. Sharma for being here tonight, because he was on one of the SAC groups that studied this over a number of years. And he came up and said, I'm really excited to be here to see this continue to move forward, because it's something that people are passionate about. But we did talk about the importance of this position. Although the board would fund it potentially for a couple years, that eventually it would need to be self-sustaining to stay in place. So happy to open it up for questions, comments, concerns.
Mr. Lewis, I'm overall very supportive of this. I do think the language of the first sentence could be strengthened, and that is in the to increase alumni participation, I think is narrower than I would like to see the umbrella. I would like to see it more about establishing a foundation as a goal, of which, to be successful as a foundation, you would have to necessarily increase alumni participation. But I'd rather have it more broadly stated, and in your words that you just used about the vision of the foundation, I'd like to see that somewhere in the description, especially in that first opening paragraph. I think it's right that a job description's naturally open and general, but that particular element I think is critically important for this role, because it's not just for alumni participation we would do this. We would actually be doing this for, developing a foundation like universities have, and like, quite frankly, multiple high schools in the state of Ohio have foundations that they can leverage. And so I think this that concept of foundation is to me critically important for this role description.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Comfort.
Mr. Lewis, I am also I'm generally open to this concept, and I really enjoyed and learned a lot from the presentation that we had last year. It was very helpful. And at that time, I really did a lot of research just because I wanted to understand the role of a foundation versus potentially hiring somebody to be a development coordinator. I know that there's a need. I understand it. I'm not set and sure on the approach I personally, as one board member, would like to take. I don't know that I wholly agree with having a foundation for our school district. I would like to see more information on public schools that have one and understand that. I know that there are. I would just want to understand how much work that would require, how many committees would be required for that. I know that there's a lot of legal. I researched a lot on that last year. There's just a lot of legal requirements when a school district creates a foundation. And I would want to understand the role of our community versus our board and how that played out. So again, I'm in the phase of learning. To me, this seems better, hiring a development director or some kind of person that can work on alumni issues and not creating a foundation and not putting them together. But I'm still in the early phases. I'm not saying one way or the other, but I want to learn more. So if you could keep educating us on this issue, that would be great. Thank you.
I have quick comments also. I loved all the work that you guys have done on this. I'm very supportive of this role. But right now, in light of the town hall this afternoon, I think we should put a pause on this because it was mentioned by Mr. Porter and Mr. Lewis that there might be a need for the district to focus on possibly adding a second social worker as a full-time employee. I'm not sure we're going to have the funds to continually add all these full-time employee positions. And right now, I think a critical need in our school district might be on the mental health of our students. So I want to put a pause on this and hold off and see what the costs would be, et cetera, before I can make a decision.
Any additional questions from the board? Mr. Lewis, moving on to other.
Yep. So I will get back with you. I'll do some additional research and bring it back at a future meeting.
Yeah, and I do agree that, we have talked about having a presentation more in depth on a foundation and what that actually entitles. So I do think that would be a topic for a good topic for a board meeting soon.
Sounds good. For other, it has been I'll say a busy couple of weeks since our last board meeting. First and foremost, I want to thank our community that attended the community forum, the safety forum, and talking about some of the issues that have been at our high school, and appreciate Mr. Ballant, Mr. Porter, and everyone else that was part of setting that up. Ms. Bondbright did a phenomenal job of moderating that for us and setting that into motion. Hopefully the community felt that they got the responses and information that they needed to move forward. Our Juniper FTC robotics team are the state champions. One of 37. They are advancing to the world competition in Houston. We have been in constant contact with them. That'll be in mid-April. So we wish them well and best of luck at the world competition. They are ranked in the top 250 of the entire world in robotics, which is pretty cool. But they are the state champs. They scared off one of the other schools. They went to Kentucky to not compete against our school district. So, but I think probably the Kentucky schools are probably a little upset. It was Walnut Hills and they won the championship in Kentucky. So I'm not sure how that works, but that's what happened. So we had a state champion indoor shot putter. Mandy Arbabi was second place last year and he moved up a notch. First place, 58.3.75 was his shot put distance. So I think it was significantly higher than the next person. So state champion Eugene Harney, 150 pounds at wrestling. So we will make sure we get these state champions in and recognize them at a future board meeting. But we also had some other recognizable things that happened. Caroline Kearns, our first state qualifier in girls wrestling, which is really awesome. Adam Gelman qualified for state. He was also the district champion in his weight class. Bryce Minchhofer was second in the state in 500-yard free. So congratulations to our swimmers. I do know that relay also moved up significantly, and I think we mentioned that at a previous meeting. Our DECA students, 43 students finished in the top 10, 24 are advancing to the international competition, 8 first place positions. And if you look on the screen, one of the pictures is the robotics team. The other picture is DECA, and they have a row of trophies in front of them. So impressive by Mr. Steedley and his students, and thank you for representing us so well. Footloose was this past week by the junior high students. It was amazing. Just an amazing performance, great singing, great dancing, great choreography. So thank you to Mrs. Rosen and her students for putting that on and all the people involved in that. Last couple of things, Winter Drumline and Guard had their first competition this past weekend. They scored very well. Sims Elementary, they had their third grade performance this past weekend. So busy. And then the last but not least, superior rating for band 2 and 3 and an excellent rating for band 1 this past weekend. So lots of activities, lots of good news, things that are happening. While we're obviously we had to put out a fire and deal with that, but there's still a lot of good things happening with all of our students. They're doing amazing things inside the classroom and outside the classroom. So thank you for indulging me with all that information.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I need a motion for the approval of the treasurer's consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Weber, any comments?
I would like to point out, you'll see this in both this agenda and probably the next couple of agendas. Mr. Corteal does a really great job in securing scholarships, opportunities, and dollars to be able to fund some significant scholarships for our senior class each year. One of them that I would just point out is the Nancy and Kenneth Orr Scholarship. Nancy and Kenneth were long time residents of the city of Blue Ash. They have since passed away, but they have provided a nearly $300,000 endowment to the Greater Cincinnati Foundation to support Sycamore graduates. So this is just annually we're going to get funding from that, from any investment income from the trust. So that's really been a wonderful, wonderful gift to our graduating seniors each year. But you'll continue to see, because we're seeing them come in little by little in preparation for providing those awards to our outgoing seniors. I did also want to point out, because it's something that may come up in a bit when we get into the legislative update, is that we just received a portion of funding that we administer on behalf of our non-public schools, our private schools in the district. The state of Ohio provides what's called auxiliary services funding for Moeller, Ursuline, and Blue Ash Educational Building for us. Their allotment that they received in February was just about $1 million for those 3 schools. So that is included in our annual budget, because we administer those funds on their behalf. So just wanted to point that out, that we do provide support for those schools. We are, again, fine with them receiving those dollars, but when we get to that portion of the agenda, I just want to talk about how Sycamore's funding from the state compares. So that is it on the consent agenda.
Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Dr. Steger,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballant.
Aye, motion passes. I need a motion for the approval of the financial reports, February 2023.
So moved.
Second.
Just a few things that I'd like to point out in the financial report. Number one, this is the time of year that we're seeing advances in our real estate revenue coming in from Hamilton County. Right now, we're right about on track. We did actually receive one more advance, and we're very close to receiving the funds that we have projected in this category of our budget, which is good news. The second thing that I wanted to point out, and it's not in our general fund review, but did want to point out within our master facility plan report, that we have received a significant disbursement from the Greater Cincinnati Foundation for those funds that have been collected for all of our Always an Aviator projects. So you can see now for just our general athletics, we're about 50% of the way there in actual funds, not pledged, but actually received by the district. which is great. And then we are at about 25% of the funds that we projected to receive for the natatorium project, but those are all right on schedule with those pledges. So seeing, a disbursement back to the district, which we're utilizing to fund those projects. And we continue to work closely with the Greater Cincinnati Foundation on making sure that they're aware of what's coming in, making sure that they're doing what they need to do to provide the information to those donors that's required. So good news on that front, that those funds are coming in more and more all the time.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. If we look at the 5-year forecast, total expenditures, we can see that we are 6.6% up over last year. So, the cost of benefits, the cost of fuel significantly impacting the district. Yes, we did budget for it, but a 6% increase year over year on expenditures is an alarming trend that we're seeing in the district.
I agree, Mr. Ballant.
Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Dr. Steger,
Aye.
Mr. Ballant,
Aye.
and Mrs. Bitter.
Aye.
Motion passes. I need a motion for the approval of the 2023 summer school tuition rates.
So moved.
Second.
Just to remind the board, we have been fortunate because of ESSER funding the last 2, maybe 3 summers. We have not had to charge fees for summer school. We've been able to utilize ESSER funds to be able to provide those to address potential learning loss for our students. Or interrupted learning. Is that right, Mrs. Wagner? I do listen most of the time. But anyway, because those funds are no longer, or we have utilized those for that purpose and for many other purposes to support our students and our staff, those funds are no longer available for summer school. So what we're recommending is a fee structure that's very similar to what we had in place back in what we had recommended for 2020 that we did not end up utilizing. And with that, we also are asking that the board would approve the continued practice that you've had for many, many years, that those students who are participants in our free and reduced lunch program, that they would have their fees waived in order to not create any barriers for them being able to participate in our summer school programs.
Thank you, Mrs. Weber. Any questions from the board? Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Dr. Steger.
Aye.
Mr. Ballant.
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter.
Aye.
Mr. Comerford.
Aye.
Motion passes. I need a motion for policy revision BDDA, notification of meetings.
So moved.
Second.
I am so sorry that we have to bring back a policy revision so quickly after just getting the entire manual approved, but we did receive notification from Kenna Haycox from the Ohio School Boards Association, who is our consultant, that they had been notified of a requirement in how we provide notification, or at least our policy reflects notification of our board meetings and how the public would be informed. So what the updates basically do is just note that we will provide that information on our district website. We were doing that anyway, but they just wanted clarity of that within the policy itself. So since we've already had very recent readings of all of our policies, we'll count those as our first 2. And we would recommend, in order to get us in compliance, that we approve the revisions to policy BDDA as presented.
Any questions from the board?
Don't want to be a stickler to policy, but I do believe that we should have 3 readings now that we have completed the overall work. So unless there's some specific risk we're trying to avoid, I would prefer that we go back to our policy of 3 readings before we vote. That gives the public a chance to weigh in as necessary. Just that has always been our approach for policy revisions. And unless there's a mitigating circumstance, I would propose we do the first, second, and then vote on the 3rd reading.
That's fine. What I would just ask, and I think for this evening, what would be completely appropriate is that we would table this motion. But what I would like to just make sure that I do is follow up with Mrs. Haycox, because I know that there have been some outside review of this from a group that is pressing and perhaps suing school districts for not having this policy in place as it's been presented this evening. So I think there has been some push by Ohio School Boards Association to get this approved as quickly as possible. One of the things that we do have in our policy that if we do table it this evening, we do have an opportunity to waive the 3rd reading. So what we could do if that meets what you're requesting, Mr. Comerford, is table it this evening and then bring it back and have the resolution read that we would, because of our recent readings of our entire policy manual, waive the 3rd reading and present it for approval. If that works for the whole board, that's how we'll bring it back.
And I'm open for the other board input.
I would like to give input. So what it's saying is that we just put the words "we will notify" on our website in the policy. We already notify on the website every time. And this is of essence, time is of essence because of the legal, because of the potential for financial risk that we could take.
And I have no issue with the policy revision itself, and I understand it. I'm trying to stay true to our policy, which says we have
absolutely
three readings. But if there is
it's a mitigating circumstance would be a risk, financial risk to the district, legal expense. If we don't change it quickly, we could have that situation occur.
I think it's fine to table it because what we would be also saying is our policy is important. And that we want to comply with it. I think if we can do it within the next meeting, we've at least taken a first solid step to make sure that we do have our policies appropriately in place. And I think what's more important, if you were looking at it from a legal perspective, is that we're following the procedure already that's in place in the policy. And I think we do a pretty good job of making sure that our community can tell when our meetings are. They can not only attend them in person, they can watch them virtually, at least our regular meetings. And we're also putting our regular meetings out on video. So I think we're following absolutely the spirit of this proposal. I think if everyone's okay and we can just waive that 3rd reading, that gets us closer to the finish line a little bit more quickly than if we go through the entire three reading process.
I'm fine with tabling it.
Okay.
So I'd like to make a motion to table the vote on this policy to have a 2nd reading and vote on at the April 1st meeting.
Second.
Mrs. Weber?
That was Mrs. Bitter that seconded that. Thank
Yes.
you. Mr. Comerford?
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter?
Aye.
Mr. Ballant?
Aye.
Dr. Steger?
Aye.
And Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Motion to table is approved. I need a motion for the personnel consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Dr. Steger?
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter?
Aye.
Mr. Comerford?
Aye.
And Mr. Ballant?
Aye. Motion passes. Moving on to other Board of Education business, legislative liaison report. I'm
Oh,
not
there's
sure
a
who's
lot
doing-
going on.
Mrs. Weiss is
Mrs.
we're gonna alternate. So this is Mrs.
Yeah, so this
Weiss's-
is, I know, this is my turn, but Mrs. Bitter and I have been very busy. Very, because there's a lot going on. So Legislative update for tonight. So I wanted to share with the community that Sycamore has always maintained and promoted relationships with our legislators, discussing proposed legislation and the impact that it would have on our district. Legislation that is discussed has included the financial impact to our district, including the school funding formula, changes in taxation such as TPP, as well as school district academic reporting like the state report card. Within the past 6 weeks, a team from Sycamore consisting of Superintendent Lewis, Treasurer Weber, and 2 Board of Education members, Mrs. Bitter and myself, have had conversations with Senator Blessing, Rachel Baker, Representative Baker, and Representative Miranda. We appreciate the time that our legislators took out of their busy schedules to meet with us and discuss proposed legislation in both the House and Senate. So at this time, I just wanted to provide everyone with some updates on some legislations that is being proposed. So the first is House Bill 1. Summary is that it changes how property taxes and income taxes are assessed, reducing the amount of total revenue available to fund education, public education in the state of Ohio. So related to income tax, this repeals the graduated income tax rates that apply to non-business income from that usually ranges between 2.7% to 3.9%, and instead levies a flat tax rate of $361 rounded, plus 2.75 on all income over $26,000. Related to property taxes, this decreases, it decreases from 35% to 31.5%, and the percentage of real property's value is subject to taxation. It repeals the 10% tax rollback on non-business property and modifies the 2.5% homestead tax rollback to equal a flat $125 property tax credit for all owner-occupied homes. And you're probably thinking, what do these numbers have to do with me? So this is the fiscal impact. What does this mean to you as a taxpayer? And what does this mean for Sycamore schools? Overall, for the state of Ohio, this is a $929 million annual tax increase for residential property taxpayers. It is a $157 million annual tax decrease for business and commercial property taxpayers. And what this means is a $538 million annual decrease in local tax revenues that go to schools and local governments. Legislators anticipate multiple amendments to this legislation, and the specific financial impact to our district is still being determined, but I encourage everyone to get informed on this issue. This would not be good for public schools. Senate Bill 11 expands the availability and the amount of EdChoice scholarships, removing money from Ohio public schools. It also increases the income tax credit for homeschooling families without proposing any additional regulations. Expands eligibility for EdChoice vouchers to all students beginning in the 23-24 school year, removing all existing eligibility requirements, including income and performance requirements. This is basically a shift of public school funds to private schools. These scholarships, and I put that in quotes, scholarships, are not what we think they are when we hear that word. It is simply giving private school students money toward their private school tuition bill. Sycamore Community Schools hopes that the fair school funding, previously known as Cut Patterson and House Bill 110, in its entirety is sent to the governor for signing. This will establish a floor of funding for every public school in Ohio. But even with that, we are not sure that this will be enough for Sycamore, but it is a start. Just to note, in the state of Ohio, right now in our district, Sycamore receives $600 per student from the state for education. Private schools in our district receive $1,300 per student. The state has characterized this support as auxiliary services and an administrative cost reimbursement. No one can think that this is fair. EdChoice vouchers would provide additional money to the $1,300. Specifically, Senate Bill 11 would add an additional $5,500 for private school students in grades K through 8 and an additional $7,500 to private school students in grades 9 through 12. House Bill 11 is sort of the House's answer to Senate Bill 11, and it creates a universal voucher program by providing K through 12 students with an annual education savings account to pay for non-public schools. The last one I want to talk about is Senate Bill 1. It restructures and renames the Ohio Department of Education to Department of Education and Workforce, and shifts the ODE, the Ohio Department of Education, into a cabinet level agency managed by an appointment from the governor's office. It reduces the duties of the State Board of Education to appointments, licensure, employee conduct, and territory transfers. Highlights: the renaming from the Department of Education to the Department of Education and Workforce. It creates a position called the Director of Education and Workforce, who is appointed by the governor with no education qualifications made mandatory. Transfers most of the powers and duties of the State Board of Education and Superintendent of Public Instruction to the Department of Education and Workforce. Prohibits the department from adopting additional rules for non-chartered, non-public schools. It prohibits the department from adopting any additional rules regarding home education. Here are some of the concerns. This shift to move this seems to be a business-focused decision and not a student-centered one. This bill makes education a partisan issue and shifts decisions about public education, policy, budget, funding, and priorities to the governor with little oversight or accountability. This plan does not address the root cause of Ohio's education challenges, like decades of unconstitutional funding, teacher shortages, and disparate student outcomes. It is anti-democratic by eliminating key educational roles and duties from our democratically elected state board members. It eliminates the public voice at the state level. So I encourage you, if anyone has any questions about this, I would be happy, not that I'm an expert, but I've read a lot about it. And if you have any questions or want to talk, Mrs. Bitter, I think both of us would be happy to talk with you. But I encourage you to get involved and to contact your local legislators with your opinions on this legislation. That's all I have, Mr. Ballant.
Mr. Ballant, do you mind if I make one comment? Just one of the legislators mentioned to us that some of her districts are taking a stance on this, what I would consider poor legislation for Ohio and for Ohio students. And some of them are passing resolutions in opposition of it. So I mentioned that as something I would love the board to consider at a future meeting if we believe that that's the right move for Sycamore.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Steger, Sycamore Advisory Commission update.
SAC met on Monday. Sorry about that. I'm talking a little loud. This past Monday on the 13th of March, and our wellness team made a presentation before the entire group. And what this group was looking at is staff and faculty and staff wellness in the district. They examined both corporate and other school models in the realm of wellness for their employees in the district. And the highlights for some of the recommendations for faculty and staff wellness are, you ready, drum roll, more flexibility in schedules, more breaks during the school day, work on fixing the not so great feedback received through staff wellness surveys, and keeping in place the great feedback line items that are received through those same surveys. Building leaders need to model healthy behaviors. Perhaps have the faculty and staff have access to the Gym Pass app so that they have easier access and lower prices to enter gyms throughout the country. Explore partnerships with other school districts to set up a model that maybe we can work together. Also at SAC, if anyone is interested, we are looking for some new members. If you know anyone who is interested, please have them reach out to the SAC executive team through the district website. And there were great updates from every building during the meeting, and Mr. Lewis gave all of the highlights for the great achievements of our students. I'm losing my voice, sorry about that, throughout the whole district. So that's your brief update.
Thank you, Dr. Steger. Mrs. Weiss, I'm not sure Mrs. Weiss or Dr. Steger on student academic achievement.
I don't have, Mr. Lewis rattled off a bunch of student achievements, so I'm not going to repeat those, but I will be visiting the junior high and the high school in the month of April to see what other things are going on there, and I will report back then.
Great, thank you very much. Business Advisory Council, due to business reasons, I was not able to attend, but asked Mrs. Weiss to attend, so I'll ask you to give an update.
Sure, thanks. So the Business Advisory Council meeting had a meeting on Wednesday, March 8th. I was happy to participate. We went over the purpose and goals of the Business Advisory Council and looked at our bylaws and structure. And the structure is similar to SAC in terms of reporting and things that we have to do for that. We identified nominating, we have officers now, that it was a pretty easy. Yes, we'll bring them to the board. So just to let you know, so the chairperson of the council will be Steve Burke. Vice chair will be Christine Downhauer, and the secretary will be Walter Spiegel. We also, then Christine Downhauer gave a great presentation about career exploration, internships, and shadowing experiences that she is working with Mr. Porter at the high school. She has done a similar program at St. X, and she is really passionate about it. And she wants to get some high school internships for this summer. They're kind of starting out a little bit slow, but if you're interested if you work for a business that can host a high school student for an internship, I can get you that information for Christine, so you can get in touch with her. But lots of good things going on with that business council. They're very receptive to talk about what's going on in our district and how they can support us. And we had some great conversations about different pathways that our students can take, that college is not the only way, and really exploring many different job opportunities. And there was a discussion that, there's jobs that are going to be available to our students that we don't even know about now, because things are changing so quickly. So it was a great meeting, and thank you for letting me go.
Thanks
All
for
right.
the update.
Sure.
Mr. Ballot, I would like to make a motion to have an additional thing to say. I don't know about accessibility.
I second that.
The time to amend an agenda is at the beginning of it when we go through agenda. I mean, I will allow it, of course.
Okay.
But in the future, if you're going to put something on agenda, we need to put it on at the beginning.
Okay, well, it's in response to what has come up during the meeting. So I need to be able to have a way to address that. So for the future agenda, can you always add, as we used to have, I know in some of our agendas, an other or an additional board feedback or something to that extent, so that should something come up during a meeting, we can continue that conversation. I would motion, I don't know if it's a double motion, but I just wanted to say that we just had a really, thankfully, no one was hurt yesterday during the situation with the fire. And that was a situation that my family was personally impacted by. I also have a student with a disability who has accessibility needs. And I would just like to make a recommendation to the superintendent and to the business operations director and to everyone else that we go back and just take a look. Should there be an emergency in the high school, that we have our students are able to get out of that building safely. I think that is a fair and absolute necessary request. I realize this is not something that we are purposely, we're trying to do the right thing by all of our students, and I know that, but I just want to make sure that we are really looking at exits and entrances. Sometimes when things happen that are challenging, it causes us to go back and look and re-look at the steps. And I would like to make that request. I think it would be very helpful. I think it would help families feel at ease to know that there's the way out, or even to have those students practice getting out. I know there are fire drills, I know all of that, but the people who are using wheelchairs, the people who have a hard time with steps, the people who might have intellectual disabilities or may have healthcare conditions, when there's an emergency, they're the most at risk. This is something that I would just like to bring to your attention once again. So please take a look at that. I know that you always do, but please continue with that and take an extra set of eyes, please. Thank you.
Mr. Ballant, just wanted to remind everyone that our April evening board meeting will be at Sims Elementary.
Thank you. That is a good reminder. The board will not be going into executive session. So with that, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.